My name is James Wilson. I'm 34 now, but this story starts 5 years ago, on the night I turned 29. That was the night my brother cheated with my fiancée at our engagement party. Before I tell you how a single phone call 5 years later brought their entire world crashing down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always good to know who's out there listening. The party was, by all accounts, perfect. It was one of those warm Chicago evenings in late spring where the air itself feels hopeful. We were hosting it at the home I just bought, a classic brick bungalow that I'd poured my heart and soul into renovating for the better part of a year. Every detail was a testament to the future I was so certain of. The scent of freshly mown grass mingled with the sweet, heady aroma of the gardenia bushes Olivia had insisted we plant by the porch. That scent, for 5 years, was the scent of my home, my comfort. Our friends and family, about 50 of them, were scattered across the new stone patio and the lush lawn. Their laughter was a gentle melody under the smooth jazz coming from the trio I'd hired. It felt like a scene from a movie about someone else's perfect life. But it was mine. I had a great job, a rising star at a prestigious architecture firm. I had Olivia, the woman I'd loved since we met in a crowded lecture hall in college. And I had a future that felt as solid and well-designed as the structures I spent my days creating. I remember the week before, picking out her engagement ring. The jeweler had asked me what I was looking for, and I'd said, something that looks like forever. It was a platinum band with a simple, elegant diamond. Classic, strong, unbreakable, or so I thought. I was standing on the deck, a glass of champagne fizzing in my hand, just soaking it all in. I watched Olivia glide through the crowd, a vision in a white dress, her laughter bright and easy. My brother, Thomas, materialized beside me, slinging an arm around my shoulder. He was 2 years younger, but he always acted like he was 10 steps ahead of the world. He had a salesman's smile, dazzling, wide, and perpetually hungry. You finally did it, big brother, he said, his voice a little too loud. He raised his glass, commanding the attention of everyone on the deck. A toast to my brother, James, a man who always knows exactly what he wants and does whatever it takes to get it. He's an inspiration, a lesson for all of us. The words were complimentary, but the tone was laced with something else. An edge, a subtle mockery that only I, who had grown up in his shadow, could detect. It was his way of painting me as a plodding, predictable caricature of success while positioning himself as the exciting, spontaneous alternative. I dismissed it with a tight smile. Tonight wasn't about our lifelong rivalry. It was about Olivia. It was about us. A little while later, the desire to have a quiet moment with her, to pull her away from the crowd and just breathe, became overwhelming. I scanned the patio, the kitchen, the living room. She was gone. Her sister, Chloe, just gave me a vague shrug and gestured with her wine glass toward the back of the garden. I think she went to get some air, she said. I set my glass down and walked down the stone path I'd laid myself, passing under the soft glow of the string lights I'd hung in the branches of the big oak tree. The farther I walked, the more the sounds of the party, the music, the chatter, faded into a distant, pleasant hum. And that's when I saw them. They were tucked away in the deepest shadows of the yard, near the old garden shed where I kept the lawnmower and tools. At first, I couldn't make out who it was. 2 figures, silhouetted against the faint light from the house. Then my eyes adjusted, and my heart stopped beating. It was Olivia, and it was Thomas. His hand was resting on the small of her back, possessively, in the exact same way I always held her. And they were locked in a deep, searing kiss. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek. This was a kiss of intimacy, of secrets, of a shared world that I had no part in. The universe went silent. Every sound, every sensation, every thought just ceased to exist. There was only a deafening roar in my ears. I didn't storm over there. I didn't scream her name. I was paralyzed. My body, a vessel of pure shock, simply turned around. I walked back through the laughing, oblivious crowd, a ghost at my own celebration. No one noticed the look on my face. No one saw that the man who had been celebrating his future just moments before had just watched it burn to the ground. I walked straight through the house, out the front door, the cold, sharp edges of my car key pressing into my palm. And I drove. I just drove. The hotel I found was an anonymous box off the I-90, a place designed for people who were either arriving or leaving, not for people whose lives had just stalled out completely. The walls were a depressing shade of beige, and the art was a series of faded, generic floral prints. It was a perfect reflection of how I felt. Utterly empty. I sat on the edge of the stiff, scratchy bedspread for what felt like hours, just staring into the darkness of the room. The only light came from the insistent, rhythmic blinking of the smoke detector on the ceiling. Blink, blink, blink. A tiny, red heartbeat in the crushing silence. My phone had been vibrating on the nightstand, a frantic, relentless buzzing against the cheap wood. Dozens of missed calls, my parents, Olivia's parents, Sarah, Michael, and texts. So many texts. Where are you? Everyone is worried sick. James, call me. I couldn't bring myself to look. Speaking felt like an impossible task. What words existed for this kind of obliteration? Finally, well after midnight, 2 messages pinged that cut through the noise. They were the only ones that mattered. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. The first was from Olivia. The screen lit up her name, a name that had meant safety and love to me just hours before. Now it looked like a foreign word. The message was short, brutal in its efficiency. James, I'm so sorry you had to see that. I don't know what to say. Thomas and I, it's been going on for about a year. A year. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. 12 months. 365 days of lies. I thought about all the moments in that last year. The trip we took to wine country for our anniversary. The nights I'd worked late on the bungalow renovation while she was supposedly out with her girlfriends. The way she'd helped me pick out paint colors for our future nursery. It had all been a performance. Every "I love you," every touch, every shared smile was a lie. I wasn't just a fiancé, I was an audience. Then, a new message appeared beneath hers. From Thomas. I love her, man. You were never what she really needed. She needs passion, not a project plan. The arrogance of it, the smug self-justification was breathtaking. He wasn't sorry. He was proud. He'd won. He'd taken the 2 things I valued most, my fiancé and my belief in my own judgment, and shattered them with a single selfish act. I dropped the phone onto the comforter. It felt contaminated. I replayed scenes from the past year in my head, but now they were all tinted with the ugly filter of this new reality. A family barbecue from the summer. I'd been grilling, and I'd seen Olivia and Thomas laughing together by the fence. I had smiled to myself, happy that they were finally getting along. Thomas had always been competitive with me, and Olivia had found him exhausting. But over the last year, she'd said he had matured. Matured. What a joke. They hadn't been bonding. They had been conspiring. Right in front of my face. A sharp, insistent knock on the door jolted me out of my downward spiral. I ignored it. Came again, louder this time. A familiar voice called out, muffled by the door. James? To Sarah. Michael's here with me. Come on, man, we know you're in there. Please open the door. Sarah and Michael. My friends. My real family, as it turned out. With a monumental effort, I dragged myself off the bed and unlocked the door. The sight of their worried faces was the first genuine human connection I'd felt since I'd driven away from my house. Sarah didn't say a word. She just stepped in and wrapped her arms around me in a fierce hug. I felt something inside me crack, a single, hot tear rolling down my cheek. Michael followed her in, his expression grim. He was carrying a greasy-looking paper bag that smelled of fried chicken, and in his other hand was a bottle of good whiskey. We figured you wouldn't have eaten, was all he said. He set the bag and the bottle on the small, circular table in the corner. He didn't press me for details. They both knew. The rapid disintegration of the party, my disappearance, Olivia and Thomas leaving together shortly after. It wasn't a hard puzzle to solve. I saw it coming, you know, Sarah said softly after a long stretch of silence. as I nursed a glass of whiskey. Not this, not exactly. But I never liked the way he looked at her. It was predatory. Like she was a prize he wanted to steal just to prove he could. Michael nodded, tearing off a piece of chicken. I told you that time at the lake house, remember? He made that weird comment about how you'd lucked out with Olivia. It wasn't a compliment. It sounded like he was jealous, but not in a good way. In a way that meant he thought she should have been his. They had seen the warning signs that I, in my blissful ignorance, had missed. They had been better friends to me than my own brother. We sat there for hours, the three of us, under the humming fluorescent lights of that soulless hotel room. They didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. They just bore witness to my grief. Their quiet, steadfast presence a bulwark against the utter desolation I felt. My phone buzzed again. A call this time. Grandma Martha. I couldn't answer. I didn't have the strength to hear her kind voice, to tell her that the family she so cherished was rotten at its core. I let it go to voicemail. But her name triggered another cascade of memories, colder and clearer than before. It wasn't just the incident with my dad's money. It was a pattern. I remembered being about 15. A kid in my class, a nice, quiet boy named Kevin, had accused Thomas of stealing his expensive calculator before a big math final. Thomas, of course, denied it vehemently. He didn't just deny it. He launched a counteroffensive. He subtly spread a rumor that Kevin was a cheater, that he was trying to get Thomas in trouble to eliminate the competition for the top grade. He was so convincing, so charmingly indignant, that by the end of the week, most people believed him. Kevin was ostracized. I found the calculator a month later, hidden in the back of Thomas's closet. When I confronted him, he just laughed. "It's not my fault he's so easy to hate," he'd said. "People believe what's more interesting." My parents had never found out about that one. But they didn't need to. They had their own system of denial. My dad, Richard, the successful lawyer, saw the world in terms of liabilities and assets. Thomas's misdeeds were liabilities to be managed, minimized, and contained to protect the family's overall asset value, its reputation. My mother, Eleanor, was the chief emotional investor. She had poured all her hopes into her charismatic, handsome younger son. She saw his recklessness as passion, his deceit as ambition. She couldn't afford to admit her investment was a bad one. Admitting Thomas was flawed would mean admitting she was flawed for favoring him. And Olivia, I finally understood. It wasn't just about Thomas's charm. It was about his promises. My life with her would have been good. We would have had a beautiful house, a great salary, a 401k, a future as predictable as a dividend check. Thomas would have promised her the world. A gamble, an adventure, a life of dizzying highs. He'd preyed on her own quiet fear, a fear of being ordinary. After 4 days in that hotel, a cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just a breakup. This was a hostile takeover of my life, and I had been the only one who didn't see it coming. I wasn't going to just fade away. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative. I showered, shaved, and put on the cleanest shirt I had left. I checked out of the hotel. I was going back to my house. Not to plead, not to fight for a woman who was already a stranger to me. I was going back to pack my bags, to collect the shattered pieces of my self-respect, and to look every single one of my betrayers in the eye. I needed to stand in the rubble they had created and declare my own independence. I thought that was the battle I had to fight. I had no idea the real war was just about to begin. The first year in Seattle was a blur of rain, coffee, and work. I threw myself into my new job at a prestigious architecture firm, using long hours and complex projects as a shield against the crushing weight of my new reality. I rented a small, characterless apartment downtown, a place with no memories, no ghosts. It was a blank slate, and I filled it with nothing but exhaustion. My colleagues at the firm, a sharp and ambitious group, saw my relentless work ethic as a sign of incredible drive. They saw a young architect determined to make his mark. They didn't see the man who was running from the silence, the man who would wake up in a cold sweat from nightmares of a garden shed and a treacherous kiss. Success became my refuge. If I couldn't be happy, at least I could be accomplished. The effort, born of desperation, began to yield results. My designs, which were always meticulous, now had a new edge to them, a boldness I didn't possess before. It was as if losing everything had freed me to take risks I wouldn't have dared to before. My boss, Frank, a gruff, no-nonsense man in his late 50s, started to notice. He began giving me more responsibility, testing me. It was during this time that I had my first major setback, a humbling experience that, in a strange way, was necessary for my healing. Frank had put me on a team competing for a high-profile library project. I was so determined to prove myself, so paranoid about being outmaneuvered, that I held my ideas too close to my chest. I didn't trust my teammates, seeing potential rivals everywhere. I misinterpreted a colleague's constructive criticism as an attempt to undermine me and went over his head to Frank. Frank called me into his office and closed the door. He didn't yell. It was worse. He looked at me with a profound disappointment. "Wilson," he said, his voice low, "you're one of the most talented young architects I've ever seen. But right now, you're a terrible teammate. Whatever baggage you're carrying from your last job or your last life, you need to set it down. Architecture is a team sport. If you can't learn to trust the people in the trenches with you, you will never lead them." It was a brutal, necessary truth. I had let my trauma poison my new life. I apologized to my colleague and to the team, and I forced myself to start over, to learn to trust again, one small step at a time. We didn't win the library project, but I learned a lesson more valuable than any commission. It was after that humbling experience that I was assigned to a new project, a landmark undertaking for the city, the Beacon Museum of Maritime History. It was a once-in-a-career opportunity, and it was there that I met Rebecca. She was the lead interior designer, brought in from another firm. Our first meeting was a battle. She was brilliant, sharp-tongued, and completely unintimidated by the architects. She hated my initial proposal for the main atrium's lighting. "It feels like a hospital morgue, James," she'd said bluntly. "These artifacts need to breathe. They need warmth, not sterile observation." I thought her ideas were impractical and overly sentimental. We argued for an hour, sketching and erasing, challenging and defending, until we landed on a hybrid design that was more innovative and beautiful than either of us could have created alone. That argument was the beginning of our friendship. We started having lunch, talking about design, about life. I was guarded, cautious, but Rebecca was patient. She had a quiet strength, a way of seeing past the walls I'd built. Our relationship deepened slowly, built on a foundation of mutual professional respect. We worked together seamlessly on the museum project, our skills complementing each other perfectly. One evening, after a grueling late-night session before a major deadline, we were the only two left in the project office. We were both exhausted, surrounded by blueprints and empty coffee cups. "You're a machine, you know that?" she said, a tired smile on her face. "I just like to work," I said, the standard excuse. She looked at me, her gaze steady and perceptive. "No," she said softly. "It's more than that. You work like you're trying to build a fortress around yourself." Her words hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. She saw me. She saw the truth I tried to hide behind my ambition and my long hours. That night, for the first time, I told someone the whole story. Not the condensed version, but the whole ugly, painful saga. I told her about the party, the ambush in my living room, the cold finality of walking away. I expected shock or pity. Instead, she just listened. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Then she spoke. "My first business," she said, her voice quiet. "I started it with my best friend, my maid of honor. 3 years in, I found out she'd been siphoning off funds to a secret account. She'd been planning to leave and start a rival company, using my money and my client list. It didn't just almost bankrupt me. It broke my ability to trust." She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw a reflection of my own pain, a shared understanding that went beyond words. "The worst part," she said, "is the voice in your head that keeps asking, 'How did I not see it?' It makes you feel stupid, blind." She got it. She actually got it. That night, sitting in the quiet glow of the desk lamps, a profound shift occurred. I wasn't just a victim telling a sob story. I was a survivor talking to another survivor. The fortress I'd been building around my heart finally had a gate, and I had just opened it for her. The next few years were transformative. The museum project was a staggering success, winning multiple national awards. My role in it catapulted my career. Frank made me a junior partner, with a promotion that came with a salary that was more than I'd ever imagined making. For the first time, my success felt like my own, not like something I was doing to spite the ghosts of my past. Rebecca and I fell in love. It was a slow, cautious love, built on trust that was painstakingly earned. It was real. The only tether to my former life was Grandma Martha. We spoke every few months. She never asked for anything, never tried to guilt me into reconciling. She just listened. She would give me brief, reluctant updates. Thomas and Olivia had gotten married in a lavish ceremony I wasn't invited to. Thomas had started a real estate company, Wilson Development Group, using, I later learned, the last of my parents' savings as seed money. He was, she said, a big shot now, always talking about his deals, his connections, the mansion they'd bought. He loved to paint me as the bitter brother who'd run away, unable to handle his dazzling success. I knew it was all a house of cards. A man like Thomas doesn't build things. He just finds new and creative ways to burn other people's money. I told myself it didn't matter. His universe was his problem. I had my own universe now, a better one. But you can't outrun your past forever. Eventually, it comes calling. And it always wants something. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in October. The kind of day in Seattle where the sky is a solid, determined gray. I was in a critical meeting in our firm's main conference room. We were pitching a massive project. A sustainable, futuristic corporate campus for a tech giant. It was the biggest potential contract in our firm's history. I was at the head of the table next to Frank and Rebecca, leading the presentation. We were in a rhythm, confident and prepared. My phone, set to silent on the polished mahogany table, lit up and vibrated. I glanced down. An unknown number with a Chicago area code. A cold jolt went through me, an unwelcome echo from a past I had buried. I ignored it and continued with the presentation. It buzzed again, and then a third time, and a fourth. The vibrations were frantic, insistent. This wasn't a telemarketer. This was a house on fire. The client, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, noticed my distraction. My focus, usually absolute, was broken. "Everything all right, Mr. Wilson?" she asked, her voice neutral but her eyes missing nothing. This was it, a moment of truth. I could ignore it, push through, and potentially salvage the biggest moment of my career. Or I could face the ghost that was so desperately trying to claw its way back into my life. I made a choice. "My apologies," I said, my voice calm and steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "Please excuse me for one moment. I believe this is a pressing family emergency." I stood up, nodded to the client, and walked out of the glass-walled conference room into the quiet hallway. The firm I had helped build, the symbol of my new life, surrounded me. I took a deep breath and answered the phone on the 7th call. "Hello." A sound came through the speaker, a strangled, gulping sob that was barely human. Took me a second to place it. It was my mother. "James? James, is that you? Oh, thank God. Thank God." Her voice was a wreck, torn apart by panic. "What do you want, Eleanor?" I asked. My voice was chillingly flat. There was no mom. That woman had died for me 5 years ago. "It's your brother, James. It's Thomas," she cried, the words a frantic, jumbled mess. "He's in terrible trouble. The most terrible trouble. You're the only one. You're the only one who can help us." I leaned my shoulder against the cool glass, looking at my own reflection. A man in a tailored suit, a stranger to the broken boy who had fled Chicago. "Let me guess," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. "He finally ran out of other people's money." "Oh, it's so much worse than that," she wept. "His company, it was all a lie, James. A house of cards. It's gone. He's bankrupt. But that's not it. Oh God, he committed fraud. Serious fraud. I waited, saying nothing, letting her desperation fill the silence. He used your father's name, she confessed, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. He told people his father, the successful lawyer, was backing his deals. He forged documents. He faked financial statements. He took money from everyone, even his own parents-in-law. The Carters are ruined. The sheer scale of his recklessness was astonishing, even for him. He hadn't just burned bridges. He'd nuked the entire landscape. And now, she continued, her voice trembling, one of the main investors, David Parker, you remember him, your father's old golfing buddy. He's found out everything. He lost almost $1 million. He's threatening to go to the district attorney. He wants a criminal investigation. He wants to see Thomas in prison. James, he's going to destroy us. He'll destroy your father's law practice, his reputation, our entire lives. So there it was. The real fear. It wasn't just about their golden boy facing consequences. It was about the splashback hitting them. It was about protecting Richard's precious legacy. And what, exactly, does any of this have to do with me? I asked again, my voice as cold and hard as granite. We need money, she said, the words a blunt, desperate plea. We need $500,000, James. That's the amount Mr. Parker will take to make this go away. To sign a non-disclosure and drop the whole thing. We've sold everything. The house is on the market. We cashed out your father's retirement. It's not enough. We have nothing left. Please, James, for the family. He's your brother. $500,000. The number hung in the air between us. They had come to me, the son they had discarded, to beg for a king's ransom. They had come to me assuming I was the same person they'd last seen, broken, defeated, and starting over. They had no concept of the life I had built. And in that moment, a profound and final shift happened within me. The last embers of my old anger and hurt went cold. All I felt was a vast, empty pity. They were still trapped in their toxic, self-made prison of lies and denial. And I was standing in the free, open air. Eleanor, I said, my voice quiet and measured, let me paint a picture for you. I am currently standing in the hallway of an architecture firm where my name is on the door. The meeting I just excused myself from is with a client whose personal net worth is greater than the GDP of some small countries. The project we are discussing has a budget of 9 figures. I let that sink in. I could hear nothing but her faint, ragged breathing. That number you just mentioned, I continued, my voice clinical. That $500,000 you see as a life or death sum? I could transfer it to you from my phone right now, and I would still make my quarterly tax payments without any trouble. The silence on her end was absolute now. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. But I am not going to, I said. I will not give you $1. But why? She finally stammered, the word a pathetic squeak. We're your family. He's your brother. How can you be so cruel, so vengeful? This has nothing to do with vengeance, Eleanor, I said, and my voice was soft, almost gentle, which made the words all the more devastating. Vengeance requires emotion. I feel nothing for you people but a distant pity. This is about cause and effect. This is about consequences. 5 years ago, in my living room, you stood with a group of people and you made a calculated choice. You chose a charismatic fraud over your loyal son. You chose to protect a fantasy over a person. You made an investment. And now, after 5 long years, your investment has finally reached its inevitable conclusion. Bankruptcy. Moral, ethical, and financial. I could hear her begin to sob again. But these were the broken, helpless sobs of someone who has lost all control. You don't get to shatter a man's life and then come back when his replacement breaks, asking the original to pay for the repairs. I said, my life, my peace, my success. I built it, not with your help, but in spite of your hindrance. I owe you nothing. My only debt was to myself, to heal, to rebuild. And that debt has been paid in full. I paused for a moment and delivered the final truth. You know, for 5 years, I dreaded the thought of ever hearing your voice again. But now that I realize something. I'm not angry. I'm not hurt. I'm just done. I am finally, completely, and irrevocably done with all of you. Before she could form another word, another plea, another accusation, I ended the call. I held the phone in my hand for a second, then blocked the unknown number. I smoothed down my tie, looked at my calm, composed reflection in the glass wall, and walked back into the most important meeting of my career, leaving the smoldering ruins of their lives a continent away. A week of blessed silence followed. I immersed myself in the final negotiations for the tech campus project, the sheer scale and complexity of it a welcome distraction. I told Rebecca every detail of the phone call. She listened, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you okay?" she'd asked. Truly. And for the first time I could answer with absolute certainty. I am. The call hadn't reopened a wound. It had cauterized it. I assumed that was the end of it. I assumed my refusal, so total and unequivocal, had been the final word. I underestimated the depths of their desperation and my brother's narcissistic delusion that the world, and by extension my wallet, owed him something. The following Wednesday, I was working late again, finalizing some schematics. It was nearly 9 p.m. when I finally called it a night. The office tower was quiet, the cleaning crews making their nightly rounds. I took the elevator down to the subterranean parking garage. The vast, concrete space was mostly empty, the rhythmic hum of the ventilation system the only sound. It was my space, my building, a place where I was safe and in control. I was walking toward my car, my briefcase in hand, when two figures detached themselves from the shadows behind a thick concrete support pillar. My body went rigid. Primal fight-or-flight response kicked in. It was Thomas and Olivia. They looked like refugees from a war zone. My brother's expensive, tailored suit was rumpled and stained, as if he'd been sleeping in it. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual charming smirk was replaced by a tight, desperate grimace. He had the look of a cornered animal. Olivia was a ghost. Her clothes hung off her thin frame, her face was pale and drawn, and her eyes were hollowed out by fear and exhaustion. The vibrant woman I had once planned to spend my life with was gone, replaced by this haunted shell. "James," Thomas began, trying to inject a casual, friendly tone into his voice that sounded utterly false. "Hey man, we need to have a little chat." "No, Thomas, we don't," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. I kept a safe distance, my hand tightening on my briefcase. "There is nothing in the universe you and I need to chat about." I made a move to walk around them to get to my car. He moved with a surprising quickness, blocking my path. "Don't you dare walk away from me," he snarled, the friendly facade vanishing in an instant. "Not after what you did. You sit up here in your ivory tower, Mr. Perfect, while your family is falling apart. You owe us." "Let me be perfectly clear," I said, my voice dropping even lower. "You are not my family, and the only thing I owe you is the absolute certainty that you will get nothing from me." His face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? You think your money and your fancy new life make you better than me." He took a menacing step closer. "Well, I can still ruin you. I can make things very, very messy for you." I stood my ground. The scared boy he had terrorized his whole life was gone. He was looking at a man who had faced down his own demons and won. "Here's how this is going to go," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial hiss. "You are going to make a quiet little wire transfer. $500,000. It's nothing to you. A rounding error. You do that and I disappear. You never hear from me again. But if you don't..." He let the threat hang in the air. "Well, I have a lot of free time on my hands now. I can start making some phone calls. To the papers. To that tech billionaire you're in bed with. I can tell them all about the kind of man James Wilson really is. The kind of man who lets his own brother rot in jail while he sips champagne. Let's see how your squeaky clean reputation holds up under that kind of scrutiny." Blackmail. It was his last, pathetic gambit. He was trying to use the weapon of shame, the one his family had always wielded so effectively. But I was immune to it now. I felt nothing but a profound, weary pity for him. I almost laughed. You still don't get it, do you? You have no leverage. Your threats are as bankrupt as you are. It was then that Olivia, who had been standing behind him like a silent, trembling shadow, finally found her voice. She stumbled forward, her hands clasped in front of her in a gesture of desperate supplication. "James, please," she whispered, her voice raw and cracking. "He's telling the truth about the trouble we're in. But he lied to me from the beginning. He showed me a whole portfolio, fake bank statements, forged letters of intent. He sold me a fantasy. I was a fool. I know that. I made the worst mistake of my life. But please, don't let him drag me down with him. I'll do anything." Thomas's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing with fury. His last play was being undermined by his own co-conspirator. "You stupid, pathetic," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "You shut your mouth." He shoved her. It wasn't a small push. It was a violent, two-handed shove, full of rage and contempt. Olivia cried out, stumbling backward over a yellow parking block. She fell hard, her head cracking against the grimy concrete floor with a sickening thud. She lay there, moaning, a small trickle of blood starting to run from a cut on her temple. That was it. In that one ugly moment, his entire persona was stripped away. There was no charming rogue, no misunderstood genius. There was only a violent, abusive coward who attacked women when he was cornered. He turned back to me, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. "Look what you made me do. This is your fault." Before he could take another step toward me, a calm, firm voice echoed through the garage, amplified by the concrete walls. "Sir, I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back. Now." Two uniformed building security guards were approaching swiftly, their expressions grim. I had taken a precaution. After my mother's call, I had met with my building's head of security. I had given him a photograph of Thomas. I told him he was an estranged family member, mentally unstable, and that if he was seen on the property, they were to call the police immediately and not to approach him alone. Thomas froze, his face a grotesque mask of shock and disbelief. He was trapped. He looked from the guards to me, the realization dawning in his eyes that I had been 3 steps ahead of him the whole time. With a guttural roar of pure, impotent rage, he lunged at me. I didn't even flinch. I just sidestepped him. He stumbled past me, and the guards were on him in an instant, tackling him to the ground. He fought, thrashing and screaming obscenities, a king reduced to a common thug, his curses echoing through the vast, empty space. As they hauled him to his feet, cuffed him, and read him his Miranda rights, other guards were already tending to Olivia, calling for paramedics. I looked at the scene, the flashing lights of the arriving police cars painting strobing patterns on the walls. The wreckage of their lives, laid bare on the floor of my garage. I felt nothing. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just quiet. I turned, walked to my car, got in, and drove out of the garage, leaving the flashing lights and the screaming sirens behind me. The arrest was the final, irreversible detonation. The story of the assault in my company's parking garage, coupled with David Parker's now unstoppable fraud complaint, made Thomas a pariah. The legal machinery, once set in motion, was relentless. The Wilson family name, which my father had spent a lifetime polishing, was now irrevocably tarnished. A month later, a formal email arrived from a reputable law firm in Seattle. It was a request for a meeting on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Richard Wilson, and, surprisingly, Mrs. Martha Wilson. My immediate reaction was a visceral no. I had said my piece. I was done. But Grandma Martha's name gave me pause. She wouldn't have made the cross-country trip if it wasn't a matter of grave importance. And, if I was being honest with myself, there was a small, quiet part of me that knew this was the necessary final chapter. A full stop at the end of a very long, painful sentence. I agreed, but I dictated the terms. The meeting would take place in the main conference room of my lawyer's downtown office. Neutral ground. My ground. Rebecca insisted on coming with me, not to speak, but to be a silent presence, a reminder of the new life I had built. When they walked into the room, the change in them was staggering. It was like seeing faded, sepia-toned photographs of people I once knew. My father, who had always stood so tall and erect, seemed to have shrunk. His shoulders were slumped in his expensive but now ill-fitting suit, and the lines on his face weren't just from age. They were etched by shame. My mother looked even worse. The haughty, defiant light in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, hollowed-out grief. She looked breakable. Grandma Martha, however, seemed unchanged by the ravages of the last few years. If anything, she seemed straighter, her purpose giving her strength. She met my gaze with a look of profound, sorrowful love. My lawyer, a sharp, composed woman named Ms. Albright, started the meeting, but I quickly held up a hand. "Thank you, Carol," I said, "but I'd like to speak with them directly." I turned my chair to face them. Rebecca's hand found mine under the table, a small, grounding pressure. My father cleared his throat, the sound loud in the quiet room. "James," he began, his voice raspy and thin. We are here to offer our sincerest, most profound apologies for—" "Stop," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Cut him off instantly. "I don't need an apology. An apology is a bandage for a scrape. This was an amputation. What I have needed for 5 years, is an answer. I have one question for both of you." I looked from my father to my mother, forcing them to meet my gaze. "Why? That's it. Why did you do it? Why did you choose to sacrifice your son, who had only ever loved and respected you, to protect the one who had only ever taken and deceived? I don't want excuses. I don't want justifications. I want the truth. I want to hear you say it out loud." My mother dissolved into quiet, racking sobs, her head in her hands. She couldn't speak. My father stared at the polished surface of the conference table, at his own reflection. I thought I was protecting the family," he stammered. "I thought I was being a good father. I couldn't bear to see him fail." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "My own father was such a cold, critical man. He never thought I measured up. I swore I would never do that to my boys. I wanted to believe in Thomas's potential. I wanted to support his ambition." "That wasn't ambition, Richard." Grandma Martha's voice cut in, sharp as glass. "And it's time you stopped using that word. It was pathology. And you knew it. Both of you." She leaned forward, her eyes pinning them to their chairs. "We're not going to talk in generalities anymore. We're going to talk about buttons." A visible shudder went through my parents. My father's face went white. My mother's sobs hitched in her throat. I looked at Rebecca, my expression a question. She just gave my hand a slight squeeze. "When Thomas was 12 years old," my grandmother said, her voice low and steady, a storyteller recounting a grim fable. "The neighbors down the street, the Millers, had a little Jack Russell Terrier named Buttons, a sweet, yappy little thing. One afternoon, the dog went missing. The Miller family was devastated. They put up posters. A week later, a boy from the next street over found the dog's body. It was buried in a shallow grave in the woods behind our house. A cold, sick feeling began to pool in my stomach. I remembered Buttons. I remembered the Miller's grief. "You told everyone it must have been a coyote, Richard," she said, her gaze locked on my father. "A tragic accident. But I knew Thomas had been tormenting that dog for weeks. And a few days after it was found, when I was cleaning his room, I found the little Boy Scout knife you had given him for his birthday. It was tucked away in the back of his sock drawer, and it was caked with dirt and something else. It was blood. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, impossible to breathe. "I brought it to you, Richard," she said, her voice a relentless, damning whisper. "I showed you. And what did you do? Did you march him over to the Millers? Did you make him confess? No. You took the knife from me. You told me to forget I ever saw it. And the next day, you went to the Millers' house with a check for $500, a donation to help with their grief. You used your legal skills to smooth it over, to bury the evidence. You buried the truth about what your son was. Right along with that poor little dog. She turned to my mother. And you, Eleanor, you went along with it. You said Thomas was just testing boundaries, that boys were naturally rough. You chose to believe a comforting lie rather than face the horrifying truth about your golden child. She leaned back in her chair, her testimony delivered. So you see, James, this didn't start at your engagement party. You weren't the first sacrifice made on the altar of Thomas Wilson. You were just the last and the largest. The silence that followed was a living thing. It was filled with the weight of decades of deceit, of willful blindness. My father was openly weeping now, his face buried in his hands. My mother was staring into space, her expression shattered. They had been forced to look into the abyss they had created, and it had broken them. I finally had my answer. It was uglier and sadder than I could have ever imagined. I took a deep breath, the air finally returning to my lungs. I nodded to my lawyer, Ms. Albright. Carol, I said, my voice back to its formal, detached tone. She understood. She opened a file in front of her. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, she began, her voice crisp and professional. My client, James, has no desire to maintain any personal or familial relationship with you moving forward. However, he also has no desire to see you face destitution in your old age. Therefore, he has instructed me to establish an irrevocable trust fund in your names. She slid a document across the table. This trust will be managed by my firm. It will provide a monthly stipend sufficient for modest living expenses and comprehensive healthcare coverage. It is not a gift. It is, to be explicit, a severance package. It is the price my client is willing to pay to ensure he is never again burdened with your financial or emotional crises. All future communication, regarding any matter, will be directed exclusively to me. Any attempt to contact my client directly will be considered a breach of this agreement and may result in the dissolution of the trust. My father looked up from his hands, his eyes wide with a fresh wave of shock. I hadn't just cut them off emotionally. I had formalized it legally. I had used the very tools of his profession, law and finance, to build a final, impenetrable wall between us. I had taken away their ability to ever use the word family as a weapon against me again. I had inherited his pragmatism, but I had something he had lost long ago, a moral compass. I stood up. Rebecca stood with me. The meeting is over, I said, and we walked out of the room, leaving them to the quiet judgment of the ghosts they had created. It's been a year since that final, sterile meeting in the lawyer's office. The legal system did what it does. Thomas was sentenced to 3 years in a medium-security prison. With his father's reputation in tatters, there were no more strings to pull. He was convicted of felony fraud and assault. I read that Olivia filed for divorce before the ink was dry on the sentencing order. Last I heard from Grandma Martha, she had moved back in with her parents. A cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties in the neighborhood she'd been so desperate to conquer. My own parents downsized to a small condo in a neighboring state, living a quiet, anonymous life funded by the trust I'd established. Our severance. We have not spoken a word since that day, and I know we never will. Sometimes, life doesn't just move on. You have to consciously, deliberately, build a new one from the ground up. Right now, I'm standing with Rebecca on a beautiful plot of land we bought. A hillside spot overlooking the gray, moody waters of Puget Sound. The air smells of salt and damp pine, a clean, honest smell. Spread across the hood of our car are the blueprints for the home we are designing together. Our home. It's not a mansion designed to impress or a fortress designed to keep the world out. It's a structure of glass, warm cedar, and steel, designed to embrace the view, to let the light in from every possible angle. It's a house with nothing to hide. For so long, I was driven by a need for justice, for vindication. I thought my victory would be the day I saw them fall, the day they came to me, broken and begging. But when that day came, I didn't feel the triumphant satisfaction I had expected. Seeing them so utterly defeated didn't bring me joy. It just brought a quiet, hollow sadness for the family that could have been, for the love that was poisoned by weakness and denial. I've come to understand that my real victory isn't their failure. It's this moment, standing on this piece of earth with a woman I love, a partner I trust implicitly, sketching out the lines of a shared future. It's the quiet in my own mind. It's the absence of anger. It's knowing, deep in my bones, that my worth is not, and never was, contingent on their approval. It's something I had to build for myself from the bedrock up. I used to think my job was to be an architect of buildings. I realize now that the most important project any of us ever gets is being the architect of our own life. You can't choose the family that brings you into this world, but you can, with courage and conviction, choose the family that you build around you. You can choose to walk away from toxic foundations and build walls, not of anger, but of peace. And I've learned that forgiveness isn't about absolving them of their sins. It's about absolving yourself of the burden of carrying their poison. You don't forgive to let them back in. You forgive to finally, truly let them go. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to walk away to save yourself? I'd be honored to read your experiences. Please, share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. It really does help.